nice came with an enclosure, right, Andrew?
But anyway, so that's really interesting to me, and Andrew and I have talked in the past a little bit about some of the design choices and just the packaging choices and defining the program, because it has to be profitable. This is not a loss leader concept. So they had to identify, okay, if we're going to have a $99 retail speaker, we know what it's going to wholesale for the retailer, we know what we have to be able to make it for in order to ship it over and get everything done. So it's a very interesting process. Carl, on the other hand, who I've known for his, most of his line is what I would put on the more affordable side of things, not that they don't get expensive. But I've always thought of some of Carl's bang for the buck in the $10,000 range speakers that really pack a wall up and go above the level. Now he's evolved his top of the range speaker, and he now has the Concert Grand Reference Gold that's $197,000. So that's a totally different end where he's probably making decisions. He'll tell us today about speaker binder terminals that have an OEM and a manufacturer cost that's multiples of what the retail price of Andrew's bookshelf speakers are. So that was the idea. Let's find out a little bit about these projects and what drove them, and then one of the things I'm always interested in is what caught you by surprise. What were you doing and it just turned out to be not what you thought it was going to be, either in the good way or a bad way, and then how did you solve that problem? So maybe we'll start with Andrew talking a little bit about just how the project germinated, what was necessary to give the green light to the project, and then Carl can tell us on kind of the counterpoint, like when you're designing such a completely different price point speaker, what are the motivating factors and what do you need as far as dealer and customer demand in order to go forward with that project? Andrew?
Well, welcome, thank you for coming. Yeah, one of the interesting things about doing a speaker project like this, it all started many years ago with Circuit City. That I was doing various speakers for Pioneer, and some cheap ones, cheap in the real sense of the word, that I wasn't involved with. They weren't selling well at Circuit City, so we had this big meeting, and I said, okay, I've just recently joined, so tell me what you really feel about these speakers. And they said, they sound like cheap speakers and cheap Japanese speakers. And I said, yeah, that sounds about right. What can we do about it? And one of the keys was, very often, speaker companies, large speaker companies, they will do some research, design a range of speakers, and work out the manufacturing cost and what the retail price should be, and launch that whole series. Dealers come along, and they go, yeah, we'll cherry pick from that. And they have a knack of knowing which are the best value. When you design a range, they cannot all be equally profitable. So they know which ones are the best bargains, and they take those. But you worked out your profitability figures based on selling so many of each, and so it all goes to pot. So at that point I said, look, I don't want that. I want to design with you what you need, and only what you need. And that started off the idea of this is the way we should work. And that was very good for us at that time with Circuit City. And if you think $89 a pair, they were $39. That made me very little. So with this current project that started 3 years ago, Best Buy came to us. They wanted to expand their speaker offerings on the core floor. They didn't want to go to new manufacturers. They knew what I'd done with T.H.E and the EX speakers. Just because it's Best Buy doesn't mean that there aren't people in there who understand the market, understand hi-fi, go to the shows. And so, since we were already a partner with Best Buy for all the receivers and TVs at the time, they said, could you design a range of speakers for the core floor? And so we worked with them, we identified where their gaps were, rather than competing head-on with some of the stuff they'd already got. It was, okay, let's look at where the gaps are, let's plug those gaps. But if I'm coming out with something at $89 a pair, you've got $99, $120, I want to outperform those just because I want to do it.
Because you're a competitor.
I'm a competitor. So what that gave us was a commitment right from the start that it will be these models, and they run their business. It's a very tight ship. They know exactly what they can sell and when, and what their initial stock quantity will be. So when we start designing, we work with the factory that we've chosen, qualify the factory for quality levels. But we can go to that factory and say, this is real. So all these factories know that manufacturers come to them and go, oh, we're doing this new project, we're going to sell maybe, let's say, 5,000 sets a year or for the project lifetime. And the factory knows most times that never happens. So they don't give you the best pricing. So you start off at a disadvantage. Well, if you're going to be doing speakers at $99, at full margin, like you said, we did get accused once. A reviewer was about to write that this is a loss leader. And I had to say to him, look, you can write what you want, but let me tell you what the facts were. If I do a loss leader, what am I going to do next time? Am I going to continue making a loss every time? Because the value must be very poor when I finally come out with something that makes a profit. It makes no sense to do that. So this was all properly costed out. It makes standard profit margins for Best Buy, it makes standard profit margins for us. But because of that commitment to sell, we can go to the factory and say, we can tell you month by month on a 6-month or 9-month projection what the quantities will be, and they will be big. And that was the starting point to allow us to really hone in on getting the best pricing. And then on top of that, you've got to go, okay, so what can I afford now? And can I do what I really want to do within the price point? And that's where I need someone controlling, because as an engineer, I'm always going to run away and keep on putting more and more in. Oh, what if I did that? What if I did that? Someone has to control that and say, no, there is a price you've got to meet. And so I've got to keep within that, but do the best I can within that.
Okay, so we'll come back to where you found opportunities for savings, and some of those will be really interesting. Carl, why don't you talk about the impetus for you in the project that resulted in the Concert Grand Reference Gold?
Okay, thank you. I had several different motivations for exploring the Concert Grand. First of all, overwhelming drive with me is the music. It's really not about speakers, but it's about music and getting more music from available sources. Secondarily, in a commercial sense, our flagship is a 4-tower system called Grand Reference, which takes up a lot of space and a lot of electronics and wires and whatever. It's a difficult thing for people to deal with, not even considering the price. So I said to myself, how close can we get to the experience of a 4-tower Grand Reference with a 2-tower system if we put no limitations on it except that it was 2 towers? Now, 2 towers will have certain limitation compared to 4 towers, but it's a lot more practical, takes up less space, and if we can get close enough to it, it would be good enough for almost anyone. So we decided to explore that possibility, and the Concert Grand Reference was the outcome. We found that we had to do a lot of interesting things along the development line. We didn't want it to be as tall as a Grand Reference, so there was no way to use 9 ribbon tweeters in a row, and yet we needed the same sort of quality and output level, so we used a single 12-inch ribbon with an additional super tweeter. So it's a 5-way system, 7 crossovers. It's got to be relatively complicated internally, but extremely simple externally. So it's really much more of a plug-and-play speaker than a Concert Grand Reference could ever be. So it has a certain amount of appeal from a practicality and a commercial standpoint, but that wasn't the overwhelming drive, because no matter what, at $197,000, we're not going to sell buckets of these speakers, even if they were perfect, and nothing is perfect. So it gave us a lot of insight, and of course I could talk about that later. We used both trickle down and trickle up. That is to say, sometimes the lower cost models give us insight in what we can apply to the more expensive models, and vice versa, which is more common. So it gave us a lot of research capability to see what the limits could be and where we can apply the those concepts to lower price product, and that's why we have this whole series now called the Gold Series, which is based on a lot of the research we did with the concert grant. And so we also wanted it to be a universal speaker, which is difficult. It's 90 dB, 8 ohms. It'll be driven by any reasonable amplifier. It's more a matter of quality rather than quantity. So no purpose in having an expensive loudspeaker. Then you have to expend just as much money to find the amplifiers to drive it. That made no sense to me. So we try to make it efficient, amplifier friendly, in addition to being a concert grand reference. So there was a lot of requirements which I believe we met, but nevertheless, we can tell you some individual insights along the way with some interesting stories. And I don't know if you want to do that now or later or whatever, but not everything goes according to plan when you try to do these things that are pushing the edge of the art. So you can imagine that.
Well, so why don't you, before we come back
Yep.
to Andrew, why don't you talk about the time period, like from the time that you decided to do it, and then it takes a lot of research. How did you proceed with the research, and maybe give us one or two of those examples about trickle up and trickle down, because I think everyone would love to hear them.
Yeah, basically, I'll give you two examples, which I found, and I've been doing this a long time, not as old as Andrew, but I've been doing it a long time. And once in a while, things come along that surprise me, so I just like to convey that because I think it's interesting. We decided to call this new model, the new series, the Gold Series. And I was doing research on phase plugs, materials for phase plugs. And we tried every kind of reasonable material, aluminum, wood, plastics, everything. And then we decided, we had a solid copper for the phase plug, and we decided that, you know what, it should look gold because it's going to be the Gold Series, it's obvious, right? So we had some 24 karat gold plated solid copper phase plugs prepared. And we got to install it in one of the, at that time, a baby grand reference. This is before the concert grant. We got to install it in that to see how it would look. Much to my surprise, the speaker with the gold phase plug sounded a lot better than the speaker with the same phase plug that wasn't gold plated. And I said, this is bizarre, unexpected. So we followed it up, and we found that when you get to a certain level of quality, what happens is certain things that were never a problem in the past become audible as, uh-oh, what's that, And as you keep, as they say, taking away layers and layers between you and the actual music, defects, small as they may be, become audible. And it's only when you eliminate them that you realize that they were there. It's not like they're hitting you over the head. So we listened to the gold speaker, and we listened to the same speaker right next to it without the gold, and we said, this sounds way better. Could it be the gold phase plug? So then we put drivers with the gold phase plugs in the other speaker, and we said, son of a gun, it just sounds a lot better. And what we found was the soft gold layer was damping the hard copper, solid copper, and reducing or damping a resonance that we didn't even know we had because it was such a low level. So that's one of the things that surprised us. Concert grant has two 12-inch high-speed passive subwoofers built in. Speakers all passive. There's no digital crossovers, no electronic crossovers, not bi-wide, bi-amps. A single amplifier drives everybody. And we developed the speaker, and we decided that we wanted to make trim rings that would match the rest of the drivers so it would look presentable. The only purpose of them was cosmetic. After I developed the speaker, we fitted the trim rings. It looked really nice. They were anodized aluminum, brushed. They looked fitting for the job. So just before we finalized the project, I decided to listen to it. Found out the speaker had no bass. No deep bass. I saw this is really bizarre. And I had been listening to the speaker without any trim rings. We found that, believe it or not, the aluminum was interfering with the electrical magnetic fields of the voice coils and magnet systems with the subwoofers. And they have massive magnets and they throw considerable fuel. And it really curtailed the bottom end. So we then had to retool it and decide that, you know what, let's go with a plastic trim ring that looks nice, but it's plastic, it's inert, it's not magnetic, it's not conductive. Sure enough, we did that. Bass came back. So these are two instances where I did not predict any of this would happen because they're really bizarre. But it's only when you get to this level of quality. It's not like you can go home and replace, you know, the trim rings in your $99 speaker and they're going to go, wow, you know. It doesn't work that way. But when you get to a certain level of quality, every little thing seems to matter. And it's difficult to optimize everything simultaneously, but that's kind of like what you're up against because you keep uncovering new problems that you didn't know you had. Then the trick is to make it viable. If you can apply some of this to lower cost models, you end up with a much better product than if you never had done this model. So people ask me, why'd you make such an expensive speaker? Like, well, you know, they get offended by it. I says, well, you know what? The lower cost products benefit from this. You know, we are now in the third series of a Metro brand or a Micro brand. That's all benefiting from this same knowledge. Wherever we can apply, they have gold-plated face plus. Wherever we can, the consumer gets the benefit. That's the way we work. We trickle it down. And sometimes we find things with the smaller models that we can apply to the bigger models and vice versa. So we're very democratic, small D, in that sense of they can go anywhere, anything that makes the music better, we're for. We don't have an agenda or a vested interest in any one kind of direction. We prefer open baffle speakers. We prefer vacuum tube electronics. It's been that way for 30 years. It still hasn't changed. With digital, it seems to be even more important to us to get what we like. And you know, that's really what drives us. So it's kind of a different thing than the way a very large corporation would look at matters. They couldn't really look at it the way I do. They have a lot of people to answer to. And actually, I only have myself to answer to. So it's a different ballgame. But that gives me another advantage in that I can get as close as possible the same sonic, emotional, musical effect all the way down the line because I designed all of them. There isn't a committee of engineers. There's just me. So I have the same concept. If I want to listen to a bookshelf speaker or a concert grand, I would like it to have, as close as possible, a similar effect on the sound. So that's what's different about Nola versus a conglomerate speaker company.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting that you said is that as you eliminate a lot of potential sources of veiling, as you remove those layers, balance becomes a big thing, because when you get to a certain level, you might have multiple things that are shielding each other and they're in balance, and if you improve half of them, the ones that haven't moved are going to be in stark relief. And so you have to always be working in the balance, and then that's also an issue, and I know Andrew and I have talked about it with regard to speakers, is that the more revealing the speaker, the more the potential of problems upstream in the electronics of the source can come through. And because people are seeing the speaker and they're thinking, oh, well, amplifiers are basically perfect, or sources are basically perfect, it must be the speaker. But it may not be the speaker at all.
Can I give you one more example?
Please do.
This is bizarre. 2 weeks ago, we were at the Munich high-end show in Munich, and we showed the Baby Grand Reference Gold, which has the technology of the concert grand with a lower scale. Our distributor decided, without my permission, to obtain, and I won't mention any names, a super duper mega heavy power conditioner, right? And I said to him, I don't use power conditioners, they usually don't sound good to me. He didn't believe that, because everybody was saying, this is the thing you should have, especially at a show, you gotta have this. So we get there, and of course he hooks it up, because this is Germany, so, you know. He hooks it up, and it sounds dreadful. The next step was I had to convince him to disconnect it. That is to say, you could leave it on, because he had made promises to other people. If he borrowed this thing, he would use it, and all the politics that came about. So we left it on, but it wasn't connected to the system. It sounded a little bit better, still poor, right? So I told him it's obviously radiating a field that the CD player is unhappy with, or the CD player is doing the same thing, or the speakers are not happy with it, or whatever, but there's something going on here. So we decided to shut it off, okay, and not be connected. And that sounded better than on and not connected. This got really bizarre. So eventually, I won the argument, because I am stubborn, and eventually I did win the argument. And the next day I find the power conditioner is way off on the side. It's not only disconnected, it has no cables connected to it, it's all by itself on the end. And that gave us the best sound. So sometimes, as Peter points out, when things get revealing enough, the most bizarre things not only become audible, they destroy your whole demo. I mean, if it was a little thing, I wouldn't have cared. It collapsed the soundstage. It got thin, compressed. It sounded like, we had single-ended triode amplifiers. They sounded like cheap transistor amplifiers from 1970. This is all happening because of the presence of this power condition. That's not going to happen with a lot of speakers, but when you get to this level, all these weird things happen. And so you have to be aware of that and be on your toes because the world is not ready to accept that this could be. But it's like if you have a Ferrari, you put in, 87 octane gas, maybe you don't get the results you're supposed to get. And other people would think it doesn't matter what gas you put in the car, but not in this case.
So we'll have some time for questions. I promise. Okay, so if I'm still blathering on and asking these guys questions, not giving you a chance when it's 20 minutes till, so we'll have at least 10 minutes for questions. Just don't raise your hand. Just say, Pete, it's my turn for the question. But Andrew, this is an interesting point that we were just talking about, because when you're talking about a $99 speaker or $129 speaker, it's not going to be as revealing as your beryllium driver, coaxial, coincident, T.H.E speakers. It's going to be used with a completely different level of electronics. I mean, people are not going to be hooking up a $10,000 CD player or state-of-the-art DAC. They're not going to be using, audio research integrated amplifiers with it. So how does that? How do you take that into consideration as you were working on the project, as you're making your choices? Why don't you go back to how you allocate the budget to the different components and take into consideration, shipping costs, because that's all part of it when you're talking about the scale that you're talking about.
Well, some of it comes down to level of expectation. You mentioned about being responsible for the designs, all the designs, so it's not just a conglomerate mixture. I'm responsible for the sound of all the speakers I do, and even though obviously you have help in designing them, my decisions are what create the sound that I'm after. And that matters when you're coming down to the entry level stuff, because I want it to be the ideas that I have of the sound I want to create still matter in the entry level stuff. It's how do you get that, or what do you give up but still retain the essence of that sound. And where do you spend your money? There's a project I'm doing now that will be released in the next few months, and part of the money goes into the style of the speaker. Especially at the lower end, people will buy on blogs, and I've become known as these speakers, the Best Buy speakers. They're pretty ugly. Let's be realistic about it. And one of our Japanese engineers,
I think people would call them utilitarian.
well, this soundbar, it's called the SB- something. And he goes, it's the Susan Boyle of loudspeakers. That's exactly, that's the tagline, the Susan Boyle of loudspeakers. Unexpected performance, but it looks, but the looks were deliberate. Best Buy said we just need a black box. We decided to make curved panels for various reasons, but the result was we spent the money on the engineering, like the good old days where it doesn't. If it looks good, it must sound bad by the amount it looks good. But at the low end, that's critical. And there's a recent speaker, these speakers I'm about to release, we were going to put a nice looking thin aluminum brushed panel on the front to cover over the chassis and the screws and just tidy up the looks. And even though I'm working with a factory in China, they came back and said, oh, that front panel is going to cost me $10. And when I found that out, first of all, I didn't believe it. I knew they were playing games because we kind of keeping low on the price of every single component, so they'll always try and get back something. So $10 wasn't really true, and I was sort of going to fight them, but in the end I thought, I'm going to get it down, but not down low enough. Is it worth spending even $5 on the trim on the front, when I could put that into the driving bit, and particularly the crossovers and everything? So I said, okay, let's forget that. let's go back to Best Buy and say, do you really want us to put this on here? You know, we can change the look to be this. It's more cost effective, but I can improve the sound. And their decision was, no, go with the sound. So this new one is not, it's maybe Susan Boyle's prettier sister, but it's still not fantastic looking. But at least I've been able to change where I've been spending that money. And so I have an expectation of what I want to achieve, and it's how, you know, getting to that. And by working on the high-end stuff and knowing, like you're saying, trickle down, trickle up, trickle down, I know what can be done. So I've always got that in the back of my mind. But often you'll work with people who don't have that expectation. So on the soundbar, I was developing a powered wireless subwoofer to go with it. And I was working with the factory, their DSP engineers, because this was all DSP processing for Dolby Digital and everything. And we put together the amplifier and the subwoofer, and I started listening to it, and it's just not giving the amount of output capability that I think should be possible for this thing. And their DSP engineer was going, yeah, it's not surprising. You need to put back in the circuits that will do the compression. You know, so when the amplifier gets close to clipping, it won't sound nasty. There's circuits, DSP algorithms in there for controlling for driver excursion, amplifier voltage clipping, current limiting, all this kind of things. You need to start dialing those in. I said, yeah, but it's not doing what I think it ought to be capable of. And I start looking at the driver movement. It's a 6.5-inch bass driver, and it's only moving about that much. I'm thinking, it should be moving that much. If it's only moving that much, why am I even using a 6-inch driver? I might as well have a 4-inch subwoofer, which kind of makes no sense. So I said, look, go and put a scope on it. Go old-fashioned. Analog scope, don't want a digital scope, just an analog scope. Show me, I want to see the power supply waveforms, I want to see the voltage across the drive unit, I want to see what's going on. And they were fighting with this. And I said, look, and they'd done projects for other people, and they said, this is what we always do. But it's not good enough. So they went away, put the scope on it, came back, tail between the legs, saying, there was a problem with the amplifier, it was limiting, or the power supply for the amplifier was limiting early. Exactly. And so we put in the amplifier, suddenly I got the performance that I thought I ought to be able to get out of this particular configuration. But because they hadn't got such high expectations, I mean, remember you could say, Andrew, why are you using a factory that didn't have those kind of expectations? That's my job. My job is to control the people who can provide the product at the price point I need that wouldn't have been able to achieve that performance by themselves because they don't have the ideas of what is possible. And my job is to convince them it is possible to engineer the product to do that. And then at every step, look at what they're offering me, what I've asked them to do, and see does it meet my expectations. So that's the first point, it's the expectation level, so that you can get to the performance level.
Carl, going back to you, when I guess two questions I have. One is when you are examining everything, you know, you just owe it to yourself in the project, I'm sure, to try out the Furtec connectors or the different, you know, maybe the next gen connectors or whatever. How much of an impact do those kind of things have at the end of the day on the speaker when you're changing capacitor material or, you know, the different kinds of pieces that go in? How much of that is in it? And then secondly, because you have a range, what, you already talked about the fact that the concert grand reference gold is 2 towers, you know, a left and a right channel as opposed to 4 towers. But it still probably has some kind of optimal space that it's serving. I mean, you wouldn't put that speaker in a room that's 11 feet wide and 15 feet deep. So maybe if you could talk about those two things, and then I have a couple follow-up questions with Andrew, and then we will ask the audience. Oh, I got 8 minutes. Carl.
Okay. First of all, I listen to everything, whether it's a wire, capacitor, inductors, connectors, cabinets, stamping material, you name it. I listen to all of it because we're dealing with an entire system, and one bad link in the system can destroy the entire design. What we found is that, unlike what a lot of audiophiles would like to believe, spending the most money on a certain given component, like a binding post, not necessarily give you the best sound quality that you're looking for. And there are a lot of expensive components out there that actually perform poorly when you give it a musical test. So is it let through more music or less music, okay? We don't determine that by charts, graphs, oscillograms, decay patterns. We determine that by listening. And what we found is that, and we've been criticized for this, dealers love to have fancy everything possible because a lot of them don't know how to sell the product anymore, frankly. So we use a solid copper connector made by Cordis. Looks rather mundane, but it outperforms many connectors that are vastly more expensive and sound worse. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that if you spend more money, you get, and it's not a matter of saving money, you actually get less performance. It makes no sense. So we evaluate everything by listening. We choose the best things that suit our design to give us the results that we want, rather than just going out, let's see, what's the best this and what's the best that. And it's like the old adage, if you went into stereophile years ago and you hooked up a whole bunch of Class A components, it sounds dreadful. It's like they're not matched to each other. So it's the same kind of thing. We've evaluated lots of different kinds of capacitors and whatever. And as you go up the line, we use better grades of silver, gold, oil capacitors and very high quality ones. In reality, there's no capacitor that sounds like no capacitor. Nothing's perfect. There's no driver that's perfect. So you do the best you can, but we determine that not by budget. In the case of a concert grand, we determine that by what can be achieved. Price is not the point. When you come to a boxer, which is $1,500 a pair, price is very much the point. What can be achieved so that we still make a profit at that price point? Totally different, related. We still listen to everything. But you don't have the budget to put in, $300 capacitors, $500 drivers. It's hopeless. So you have to do the best you can at the lower end. But with the concert grand reference, stuff like that, it's a matter of what gives us the best. Now, we're also subject to upgrading, which large companies frown on, because if we find a better way to do something or an improvement to a driver, and the new Gold Series woofers, which were introduced 6 or 7, 8 months ago, we found a way to make them better. Now, a large company would say, well, that's cool, but keep that for the next model and we'll jack up the price and blah, blah, blah. We put that into production as soon as we can. So the Metro Gold woofers that are sitting in our room today are a step above the Metro Gold woofers that were in the same speakers back at the Rocky Mountain show. So if you bought one today, you get the very latest that we can do as of today, not when the model was introduced. And that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, and we do let that happen, because if we can make it better, and we can find ways to reduce distortion further, we do that. And we do that mostly by theory of what it should be, and then we check it out by listening. Sometimes the theory doesn't work out, and it doesn't sound better, and when it does, we tend to incorporate it. And so we haven't raised the price, we just made the product better, and so we try to put the best product out there at the lowest price that we can afford to do that at. So, what's your other question?
Well, the rooms, like what would be an appropriate space?
First of all, we have two kinds of products. The product that has a single mid-range and a single tweeter kind of operates more like a point source speaker. The models that have multiple drivers operate more like a line source. We use the term short line sources, which we like in the big top end. We don't like line sources that go all the way to the floor, but we do like short line sources, especially when you want to fill a large room. So the baby grand reference, the concert grand reference, etc., need a larger space. So, we're talking 25 feet by 30 feet sort of kind of rooms for those models to have enough space to do their thing. This is almost never possible at any known show. Except maybe in Hong Kong, where we ran into hotels that were like the size of a city block. But most shows, speakers tend to be cramped, and it's a shame because there are so many problems. That's a whole other subject. We could have a seminar on. There's so many problems in demonstrating super high performance product at a show, and Andrew, I'm sure will agree, that we kill ourselves so that you can get a glimpse of what could be if you ever took one of these home, which will blow any demo you can do at a show because there's too many limitations at a show. So the same is very true for concert grounds. So we tend to show that at CES, where the room is like maybe 30 feet long. It's not an adequate room. If you go out in the hallway, it'll sound even better. But I mean, it's the limitations we have. So those speakers are designed for larger rooms. There's no question. For the baby grade on up. And the smaller models with single bits and tweeters are designed for more normal concert rooms, 15 by 20, something like that. And the micro is designed for the kind of closet that we have to operate in at this show. 12 by 18. That's micrograde territory. You're better off with a product like that. Most people don't believe that, we found, and they want to buy the biggest, baddest speaker they can fit into their closet, even though it's going to sound awful. It's the way it is. It's a matter of, you know, other things besides acoustic sound.
Okay, my last question for Andrew. I'm going to make it in before before the coughing begins. So, Andrew, my final two questions for you are contrasting the Susan Boyle speaker and the better-looking sister of the Susan Boyle speaker, where you have 3 times the budget to work with. Where have you chosen? Have you spread that budget across the board, or are there certain places that you found that, you know, maybe it's in the driver, maybe being able to introduce a concentric driver or something like that? Maybe that's where you get the most performance while still being able to maintain the balance. And my other question is, how much of the design of these lower price speakers compared with what you do at T.H.E. is done in the virtual domain with regard to, you know, the different CAD CAM type tools that you have, at least to get it to the point where you start listening, or maybe you listen from the get-go. I'm just interested in if there's a difference in that aspect of the designing process between the state-of-the-art and the very value-oriented.
I think it all starts with the drivers. If you don't have good drivers, you're never going to get a good system. You can ruin good drivers with doing the wrong thing with them, but you can't make a silver sound. I've been fortunate that throughout my life as a speaker engineer, which is nearly my whole life, I've always been with companies where we build from scratch our own drivers. I've never had to go and just purchase a drive unit. So either within our own factories or the factories I've used, I tool up the cones, tool up the surrounds, tool up pretty much everything except maybe the chassis, but T.H.E. did our own custom built chassis as well. So that gives you a good starting point, that you can work with something that will hopefully lead you to a good result. And then, yes, this step up it started with those drivers. It's enabled me to start developing better driving, and it is a concentric driver. I've always believed in concentric drivers, as most of you know, so it's going to be based around that. As far as the design point of view, yes, I always start from a technical point, measurements, synthesis, modal analysis of current behavior, all those kind of things. Because it enables me to get towards the result I want much quicker. But once you've got to that point, you've made some design decisions based on measurements. But if those were the wrong measurements, or you interpreted the measurements wrongly, it's not going to sound good. So you can't put together something based on technical analysis and measurement and guarantee it's going to sound good. Unless you've had a lot of experience, let's say, of measuring lots of different ways and contrasting to how it sounds. But it does get me very quickly to somewhere where I can start listening and then tuning from that. And but it's never a substitute. So I'm going through that right now. I've got to a certain point, and now I'm endlessly listening and tweaking the design. But that gets you into a whole other field of, especially with budget speakers, you touched on it earlier, but the equipment that people are going to be using with that budget speaker is not high. And sometimes I'm tempted to say, I'm going to listen to this speaker on the best equipment possible so I can really understand what it is capable of. But then if you balance it around that system, it's not necessarily going to sound right when you put it on budget equipment. And which budget equipment? You know, how many different combinations of budget equipment am I going to have to use to get a sense of what it's going to sound like? So that's the other difficulty in the design process. How do I handle it?
All right, so now we'll open it up. I'll keep my friends here. You've been patiently sitting with your hand poised.
You mentioned balance. You started to just touch on what my question was going to be involved with. You mentioned listening to every possible component. My multi-part question is, in a design, do you have a rough percentage of how much is test equipment, how much is listening? Out of the listening, is there a scientific method of listening that you use? And out of that, do you do it solely by yourselves, or do you have a small committee maybe, or a focus group where a consensus is reached, especially in the area of value speakers?
Could everyone hear the questions? Back there? All right, good.
Well, for me, I don't have a focus group. I do present, like if it's a Best Buy speaker, yes, I present it to Best Buy, both in prototype form and final form. Just so they know what progress is being made. Some of the people who listen from Best Buy, you could play anything to them and they go, oh yeah, that's really great. Others are hypercritical. And the woman who's the main buyer for Best Buy, she's got a really good ear. So you can't just get anything past her. So that's actually, it always encouraged me when big organizations like that have that capability. But in terms of proportion between them, I couldn't give you an exact figure, but there's a early on proportion, let's say, is almost 100% synthesis, measurement, analysis. And then the proportion changes as you go through the development cycle.
When you say that, are you talking about driver design as opposed to a speaker system design?
Everything.
Both. So even with the design speaker, with everything in it, you still use measurements a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. At the beginning, there's a lot of computer analysis and measurements, and what is often confused in the popular press is, in my opinion, the measurements, and digital measurements in particular, are very good at quantifying things, but they're really no good at determining how a human being is going to react to these measurements when trying to listen to music. So we have two different things here, and measurements are not bad. They're actually necessary, and they cut down tremendously the amount of research and development time, which means that you end up with a much less expensive product if this had to all be done without these measurements. The measurements kind of get you in the ballgame, and if you have a lot of experience, as I do, as to you keep learning as it goes on, what works, what doesn't work. You don't keep trying things that never worked, okay? So you have already narrowed the course down to the few things that might work.
So you're dissing the government because of...
Government. Let's not get started about the government. When we have government loudspeakers, you really got out.
Really good.
Yeah. They won't even work, but that's another thing. So we do a lot of that. Then, once we're in a ballpark where we're using the things we think we like and we have liked before, it's a matter of optimizing the sound, evaluating the sound. I do that myself. Occasionally, I ask other people what they think, just out of curiosity. And we have people around the factory that have good ears. And I really listen to them because they usually find that, and it's not an ego thing, but usually the designer knows how to weigh, because it's always a balance. It's never like, okay, make this great, and then something is effective. So So everybody wants something, and they don't agree. So that, well, this guy wants this guy wants that. So then you can go crazy, and that's one of the reasons that corporations that use councils, focus groups, groups of any kind will then gravitate, it's scientific evidence, it's gravitate toward the inside mediocrity of what you could get. In the old days, we used to call it a carrot, it's a horse designed by a committee. So you don't want that. You want some individuality in the high end where the designer's preferences dominate, not who thinks what on 33rd Street. So that's what happens with us, and evidently happens to
never give someone a choice, because they'll always ask for something in between.
So it's
absolutely, yeah.
It's a signature sound that you're both looking for. Then.
Yes, definitely.
So do you have a scientific method to get to that?
No, I don't. I have a lot of experience in telling me the kinds of things to do to make myself happy that I've gotten to this sound, okay? But it's not like I can give somebody a menu or formula and say, just do this, 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 and this, and you're going to come out with a Paul Marchisotto design. It's not going to happen. Again, I'll just combine with what Phil hit. The thing is, the press, because of their overwhelming desire to be important, okay, always downgrades the efforts of the designer in these products. That's universal. It's been that way, probably always will be that way. But when you go to a fine restaurant, you would like to know, who is the chef? You don't ask them what kind of broccoli they have, okay? Because the chef can turn great broccoli into garbage or to make it something wonderful. So the designer is very, very important. But that seems to be something press is not interested in. So people go for like, well, do you have this feature in your speaker? Do you have that feature? They don't know what to look for as an indicator that this is something desirable. The most desirable thing I could say unabashedly is that if you like our sound, buy a speaker I designed. If you like his sound, buy a speaker he designed. Forget about all the other bells and whistles, because he has, and I have, put together the best possible package at a certain price that exhibits what we think should be. And that's, and if you have an art critic that you follow and find you agree with him most of the time, then you follow his judgment. So that's the best advice that I could give you. But there's no formula for this. It comes from a lot of experience, and you have to have talent. And you don't read about talent, experience. You don't read any of these things, because I guess they think that's not as interesting as if I had an atomic tweeter. That they would write about. So
I think that a particular example here, first back to the measurements. If I hear something, the first thing I'll go and do is go back to my measurements and say, did I gloss over something in the measurements? And then, so I can always refer back, so hopefully next time I get to the end result even better. But in terms of the personality, joining Pioneer, everyone coming from KEF and Infinity, everyone thought I was nuts. Why would I go and work for Pioneer? And a lot of the people, store owners who, my first designs for Pioneer, kind of would bring them in because they liked the sound and they knew I'd done past, but it wouldn't sell. And one case in point, an owner of 3 stores, Phoenix-based, after 6 months, this was one of my early designs for Pioneer, they brought me in to say, could you talk to our sales guys about this? Because I think it's a great speaker, but we haven't sold a single one in 6 months. So I got to the store, and in looking around, I found that they were both a KEF and Infinity dealer, and they've got some of the speakers in the store that I designed for KEF, and some that I designed for Infinity. So I gathered everyone together for the talk, and I said, before I start my talk, I want to tour your store with you guys and point out something. I walked around and I went, that's mine, that one's mine, that one's mine, now this one's mine. And pointing out exactly what you're saying. The engineer, designer, whatever you want to call them, is responsible, hopefully, for guiding what that product would be. With Pioneer, I've been lucky that they let me do that. And they promote that I've done this, which is great for me, I guess. But it means that my personality, what I believe should go into that product, is in there. And I said to these guys, that's exactly it. If a designer is mobile and moves from company to company, he'll take his ideas with him, and the company that used him will find somebody else, and they'll have now a different kind of product. I joined Infinity because they wanted me to take Infinity in a different direction. And after a while, one of the old guard guys said, you know, we're thinking maybe that in marketing, maybe we should release something that is more of the old style Infinity for a certain market. I said, okay, well, fine, then just define what that is, and I'll try and design that for you. And he, well, you know, we had extended book type base, and we had, you know, clear mid-range, and he gave all these descriptors, and I said, yeah, doesn't everybody claim to have that? Try and define it a bit more. He couldn't. So, you know, we never did that project.
It's an upside down mini Walsh guitar on it. Come on, you got it know.
So, you know, the point was the products are infused by the people who design it, and trying to quantify that is actually very difficult. But it does come down to who is working.
All right, well, before they kick us out, I'll say thank you now, but my final question then would be the reactions that you've had to these projects from other people. You design them yourselves, you guys are happy with what it is, you release it. You know, is it the buyer at Best Buy who's like, shit, now we've got a $99 speaker that sounds better than anything we sell under $200, holy cow, or, you know, what kind of reactions have you gotten? Obviously, the audiophile press has been like, here's something you can refer to all your normal friends that are just want good sound and don't care about anything else. And Carl, same thing with you. I mean, the people who have now experienced it, what have their reactions been? Maybe just 1 or 2 minutes from each, and then we'll have to turn it over to the next panel.
The reaction to our new products, namely the Gold Series, has been dramatically positive. And there's another interesting aside, which is along the line of, as you continue to make improvements, sometimes a door opens and it's quite non-linear. And that you say, well, realistically, the old models were probably 90% as good as the new models. But it doesn't work that way. That's a scientific estimation. What happens is, at some point, it's possible, and we've experienced this, that you kind of open up another door, and we call it the emotional door. These speakers seem to reveal much more emotion of the original recording than the older models. And that's not something I can completely describe why it is. It's not something I decided, you know, let's do this, this, and this, and we're going to get a lot more emotion. It happens by continuing to make things better and better and having the speaker have less personality, and it lets things through. It's kind of like we grow a lawn by stopping the weeds from killing it. And that's how you make a great speaker. You stop everything else from stopping it. It's just a negative concept. So we've had great reaction to these new models far beyond the ones previous to that, which on paper should have been, you know, almost as good. Well, they're not. And when I tell that to people, if they haven't heard them, they're a little bit skeptical, but when they hear them, they say, yeah, how about that? You know, yeah, well, how about that? So we're very happy with the reaction to the new product.
Yeah, I think with these Best Buy speakers, I've sold more speakers to people who don't want them than anything in my life. It's kind of, that's such good value. I really want to buy it, but I have my system, I don't need it, but I want to buy it. And I wish I had a son in college so I could buy them for him. I've had those kind of reactions, so that's very good. And Best Buy certainly have been very happy because it's gone to be their #1 seller. In every speaker category we're in, it's their #1 seller. So they're very happy and they keep coming back to us again, what are you going to do next
time?
Great.
All right, well, thank you both so much for your insights.
The Best Buy speaker.
I love it. I heard it a year ago at the show.
Yes, yes.
And I actually was looking. It was exactly what I was looking for, a wonderful sounding speaker. I would really like to hear that speaker as one of your T.H.E speakers in the same room, be able to switch between.
Hi, how are you? Good. I identify with you.
I'm friends with Mark the Advocate.
Yeah.
And Gary Rodgers, I'm friends with Seth Campbell. They've been
identify with
their audiophilia disease.
So they don't want to give us.
I what scale?